I'd like to invite all the presenters to come back, see their beautiful faces, wonderful. Thanks to all of you for your great presentations. For this Q&A, if you have any questions for all of our panelists here, drop them in the chat below. If you have questions for a specific person, please include their name. And if we don't get to your question, don't worry. They will be in the networking booth as mentioned earlier, so you can feel free to pop on by and see them face to face, or as close as face to face as we can get right now. So let's start us off. Levi mentioned that there are pros and cons to working in AI and consulting. So not every sector is for everyone, but I'd like to get a few more of your thoughts on some of your benefits and downsides to working on AI projects in consulting, as well as everyone else on the panel here. So maybe we'll start with Levi and then go Stephanie, Bahar, Brydon, if that works.
Yeah, thanks, Johanna. Yeah, so first of all, I can't recommend consulting enough. I do really enjoy it, but I just understand that, you know, when you look at the whole kind of spectrum of people who do vector AI master's programs, I just don't want to mislead anyone. So for one of the things that I've seen before, I've seen a couple of people, I have to be careful how I say this, you know, all the solutions we deliver, we validate the heck out of them and we know they work and we know it all works. But some people are just used to like going really deep into one problem as part of their master's or PhD thesis, whereas sometimes we just don't have the time to do that, and sometimes we just have to do what works for our clients. And some people just really don't like this idea of not getting to the absolute bottom of every single problem. We get to the bottom of the ones we need to get to the bottom of, but for example, if I learn a new tool for a project, I will learn it as well as I need and a little bit more to get the job done. But if I'm only on the project for 2 months, I'm not going to have like 3 years to become an expert in that one thing. I'll become fluent enough to make real value adds for our clients. But there are just some people who just don't really like that. But for me, frankly, I like it because you know, I've been in you know, an academic environment where I was publishing, and I found that process just painfully slow, to be honest, and just not particularly inspiring. But again, that was just me. Some people disagree with me there. Also, just the fast pace. Some people, you know, we have a work-life balance. I'm not trying to say we're all workaholics, but like there are deadlines, and sometimes you get stuck working at hours where you'd rather not be working. That's just how it is. So if you're expecting to work a 9 to 5, you shouldn't come to consulting. I have weeks that are 9 to 5, sometimes months in a row if I'm lucky, but sometimes you're burning the midnight oil, and that's just how it has to happen. Not all the time, but it does happen.
Great, thanks. Stephanie?
Sure. So as Adam mentioned at the beginning, I actually come from more of a business background. And the reason I ended up in technology consulting is because I realized at the core, the thing I most wanted to do in this world was talk to business leaders about, you know, their strategic direction and how they're going to transform their business, and some of the most important conversations that they may have, you know, ever within their organization. And the other reason is because I was really worried about having a stagnant set of skills. I wanted to be pushed in a career that constantly forces you to stay on top of new technology and evolve your skill set. We have some consultants who, you know, 10, 20 years ago were deep experts on something that has since become irrelevant or has gone mainstream, and sort of everybody can do it, and they don't need consultants to come in and do it anymore. So I guess I saw technology consulting as you know, an accelerator, a career accelerator, a way to get into strategic conversations earlier in your career where you may have the chance to know more about a particular piece of technology or a niche solution than some of the more senior consultants, and that will allow you to be invited to a very strategic level conversation that you may not have otherwise have been qualified for so early in your career. And then, you know, by nature of having been in some of those conversations, you become qualified to continue to have those conversations. So I guess what I'm saying is, in this career, if the positives are around constant evolution of yourself, constant learning, being encouraged to stay on top of things that are new and exciting, being listened to by your clients, you know, they're paying you by the hour. They actually hope to get your perspective on a lot of things, which is sometimes different than if you're in industry and people want you to stick to, you know, your own mandate and they don't have budget to contemplate some of your better ideas. In consulting, by the time you land on a project, they literally have the budget to try to do whatever you're working on with your team. So those are some of the plus sides of it. And if you want to, you can have very different types of careers. So you can end up back in industry, in which case consulting, I would say, is a big accelerator to get some very senior, interesting jobs at your client sites. You can stay in consulting sort of at your same level, either within a firm, subcontracting, etc. If you really want to just solve the same kinds of problems with new and interesting technology, or you can move upwards, you know, to a partner level or beyond within a consultancy firm. And technology is a huge expediter of those kinds of careers. And then the cons, as Levi said, you know, definitely cyclical project work. So points in time where you're extremely busy and points in time when you're not. And then also, you know, when it's not COVID, there is sometimes a significant amount of travel involved. So I've had points in my career where I've been asked to live abroad in Australia, Germany, England, etc. Times when I've been on planes 2 to 4 times a week, and then times where I'm working from home and it kind of seems very similar to COVID. So it's a mixed bag.
Great, thank you for sharing that, Stephanie. Brydon?
Thanks, Johanna. Yeah, so I think a lot of the things that have been said so far certainly resonate with me as well. As far as the pros go, for me to probably break down into like a few things. The one would be impact. Like you're often thrown into a project in a company that doesn't have a whole lot of like AI in that particular space before, so you can make a big impact quickly. Like, as I'm sure many people on the call know, ML generally has diminishing returns as you continue to like invest more and more time into it. So you'll often get to be like the first boots on the ground and get like pretty far up that curve, which is nice. The other thing is growth, like and it sort of ties in with variety as well. You often wouldn't get pigeonholed into one particular type of project. You get to take a wide variety of projects, as well as, so like a nice way to develop like a general data science background, if that's what you're interested in. And then they also do a good job in consulting to try to like give you responsibility early on and give you opportunities for leadership and things like that. And yeah, those are probably the biggest pros for me. As far as cons go, I think they've been mentioned already. Like, it's cyclical, so sometimes you're busier than others. And I think Levi made a good point. Like, if you really want to dive deep onto a project, like say for example the project that I was on, it's not so much like let's try everything and figure out what is the optimal solution. It's more like, okay, I have this amount of time. What's the first thing I can do to drive the most impact? And then after that work, what's the second thing? It's more of that type of thing. So you won't be on a project to try everything out, all of your ideas, because of just the diminishing returns, and like they're paying for you to be there. So yeah, that's probably everything from my side.
Great, thank you, Brydon. Bahar, do you have anything to add to what our other panelists have said about this?
Certainly, I would like to echo many of the things that were said, but personally, the reason I joined consulting was you really have to think about when you wake up every day, what is it that you're trying to get out of, like when you want to get out of your bed, what is it that you're thinking about, right? I'm a builder. I've always been a hands-on builder, right? I wanted to build things. And when an academy, as I think one of the other panelists has said, it was a little bit too slow for me. And I also wanted to see, like, kind of, if it makes sense, tangible results out of my research, where your research kind of almost stops or ends when it's being published at some really prestigious journal, and that's about it, and you call it a day, right? So I've always wanted to build things, and that's when I transitioned from my academia to my entrepreneurship life, where I was building what I loved, and I loved as a product every day. But I also understood that there is a bit of a business acumen that you also need, and a little bit of a credibility that when you join a big consulting firm and you start working with big clients, that you can start collecting, right? So when I go to my client and I have the credibility of PwC name behind me, then I can start building stuff that have very, very large impacts. Large clients, large impacts, right? So I think that was the reason that I also wanted to build things, but I also build things that mattered. And it matters in general because you're deploying it in the energy sector. It's going to potentially touch the life of many, right? And I just wanted to say that, yes, that's the upside of it, that not 2 of your working days are going to be the same. So you will wake up every morning to a new challenge. You also learn how to deal with other people who don't necessarily speak your language, because you're a data scientist, you're an engineer, but when you talk to a chief risk officer, it's like you're from 2 different worlds. So you over time, you actually be able to learn to bridge that gap, to both be able, especially as you get more senior in your role, to be able to still talk to your data science team, varied in terms of very technical terminology, and be able to translate that on in terms of business impact for when you're talking to a C-level executive. And I just love this this idea and this type of work.
Great so much, Bahar. And you also answered one question someone had about transitioning between a technical background and a business background. So thank you for that. The next question we have from Ricardo. What is an average timeline for an AI project to be implemented? And how many consultants are required for these projects? I imagine that would differ from project to project as well as from company to company. But maybe you can get some kind of insight on that. So we'll start with Brydon, Bahar, and then Stephanie, Levi, if that works. So Brydon, let's start.
Sure. Yeah, I think, like, to your point, Joanna, it would vary a lot. Like, from my experience, a data science project that's not going into production is probably 8 to 12 weeks. And then that could be like 1 to 2 consultants on it. But, there's like a number of variables that could cause that to be longer or shorter. And then if it is going into production, dependent on the complexity of that deployment and, who's the user and things like that, it'll probably add an extra, I don't know, 4 to 12 weeks, something like that. But, and then like I saw earlier was mentioned as well, some of them can be much longer though too, like, yeah.
Great. I think I said Bahar.
Yeah, so it's very rare that you go to a client and the client is super ready for AI and then you go there and you start implementing something, right? There's always a phase of creating a proof of concept for them. We always start with a proof of concept, something lightweight, just to show them what is it that they're trying to get, because especially when you go to industries, when you talk AI, they think, oh my God, am I getting a robot? And you're like, no, you're not getting a robot. It's just a model that spits out this specific good or bad decision, right? But in those cases, we take about 4 to 6 weeks for any proof of concept so that we can show something. The reason it takes, I would say 4 to 6 weeks, because development of it is only a couple of weeks. The problem, as all of you can guess, is whenever you get the data from your client, you really have to spend a good chunk of your time cleansing and wrangling and just making it adequate enough for any kind of simplistic model as well. So we spend a good 80% of our time doing the data wrangling. 20% of the time is basically training the model and putting a very super lightweight user interface. That's for a POC. And then when the client usually they understand the value that they're getting, and we go into basically productionalizing it. That could be another 18 to 20 weeks. That's when we deploy it, we give it to them. Usually we have a 2 weeks after that, which is for user acceptance testing. And then if all goes well, and then we get all the signatures, then we get the sign off, knowledge transfer, and just run away.
Wonderful. Over to Stephanie.
Sure. So again, I think as you mentioned, it really depends on the type of AI, the scope and complexity, and then of course, the size of the client often plays a factor in that as well, how much data they have, etc. I think if you're looking at sort of an individual standalone AI project, then probably what Brydon said is pretty good around time framing. If you're looking at something a bit more transformative with a broader scope and a bunch of different teams doing different pieces, obviously it's longer. The kind of technology projects that I oversee obviously have a lot of different components to them, so they can be years, they can be 1 year, 2 years, etc. That's why obviously they cost so much, as Andrew mentioned at the beginning. And I guess the only other thing that I would add is one thing we commonly see is because, as mentioned earlier, not a lot of companies have usually a ton of AI in place by the time we come into the picture. What you'll often see is you may do one piece and then you may get extended as they start to see the benefit and the value of a particular piece that you did. They might say, wait a minute, we think there are more applications for this within our organization. We want to explore them, and we're comfortable with the consultants that we've seen to date, so we'd like to keep them on.
Great. And last but not least, Levi.
Yeah, so I agree with everything that's been said. I'm not going to repeat what's been said, but one thing, so at the start of every new engagement, there's this thing called like an engagement letter that gets written and signed, and that defines the scope of what we're actually going to do. It's like the contract, the agreement between the client and the consulting firm. So Stephanie's a partner. I'm sure she spends lots of time reading and writing these things. It's definitely usually at the partner level. That process by itself, by the way, can take several weeks. But once that's finally done, what happens really just depends on what the client and the firm agreed to do. Like Brydon was saying, like proof of concept, sometimes like 8 to 12 weeks, I fully agree with that. But then as Bahar was saying, and then Stephanie, sometimes they evolve into bigger projects and that can be years. My Liware project was like that. We kind of did a proof of concept. Then they came back to us a few months later, and then they did like a 2-year thing. And I just helped with the first phase of that. Often they'll just sign, like Stephanie said, they'll sign the project in several phases. From our client's point of view, it's kind of a risk management thing. They don't sign away like $100 million on the first day. Like some CFO somewhere wants to make sure that they're seeing results as they go along. And so as part of consulting, even if you're a technical role, you get a lot of exposure to project management, just because it really sets the guardrails for everything that we do.
Great, thank you. It seems like you wear many hats and learn a lot of different things in consulting. So it's a great sector to work in if you are interested in that.